younger, and they're different than we are, right? I mean, to say the least. I'm sure every generation has said this, and I'm a millennial, so I remember this being said about us. I remember all the tags, we're entitled, we get trophies for everything. So what? Trophies are amazing, right? It's also true, we did get trophies for everything. I remember all of the buzzwords, all of the stereotypes and assumptions, and what I've tried my best to do when it comes to the next generations is avoid those things. And the reason why I want to avoid them is because time after time, no matter what context I get to step into with them, I never leave them without feeling more hope for tomorrow. And I know that can be incredibly difficult. And I know some of us are like, yeah, right, you don't know the ones that I see week in and week out, right? You don't know the ones that are living in my home. I know some of you are probably thinking that way. But I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I believe that they are the best generations on planet Earth right now. The way that they think, the way that they look at the world, the way that they treat other people, the things that they are passionate about, and the way that they actually back up their passion with action, all of those types of things make me more hopeful for the future because of who today's teenagers are than I think I have ever been before. But I also understand that you're serving in a unique context, and maybe in a whole bunch of different roles. So tonight, what I want to take some time and talk about are really some tactics, or like I said, some principles that I think, regardless of the role that you're serving in here at Ground Zero, will be incredibly helpful as you're aiming to lead the next generation. But not just lead them in a general direction. Come on, we want to lead them to have an authentic faith of their own, don't we? We want to lead them to experience who Jesus is and how Jesus impacts their day-to-day lives. And the community that you're doing this in, I want to recognize, is incredibly unique. I mean, you're in a beach community in the South. This is actually, I don't even think I told you all this, but my in-laws live here in Myrtle Beach. Somebody said, and I don't know if that was because you felt bad for me, or you're like, no, they're amazing. But they live here, so I have a little bit of context as to what they've experienced over the last decade or so living out here. But also, as Scott and I were talking, the students that you all are serving come from all sorts of different contexts, all sorts of different backgrounds, with all sorts of different triumphs and challenges of their own. But the good news is, let me just start here, the good news is they were created by God, who knows them, loves them, and who also created you, and is not surprised by the fact that you're stepping into this moment in their stories and in their lives to serve them. And gosh, if we just approach that with open-handed obedience, look out for what God can and will do. So my hope is that over the rest of our time together, this will be an investment in you and your leadership as you're choosing to invest in the faith and the future of the next generation. And the way that we're going to approach this, I mentioned there's going to be a handful of things we're going to talk about, but we're actually going to pause at certain increments, and you're going to talk to the people around your table. I want you to talk about what these things look like. I'll give you a few questions every now and then, give you some time to talk and process. But first, where I want to start is simply setting up this idea of what it means to lead small. What it means to lead small. This is a strategy and really a philosophy that changed the way that I do youth ministry and have done youth ministry. Gosh, at least, what is it? I don't know why I looked at my watch like it has a year on it, but it's 2024. So at least probably the last decade, this has shaped and really impacted the way that I lead youth ministry, but also the way that the volunteers that I've been leading choose to lead. And I really think that this can impact the context in which you're leading in some really significant ways. But I don't want you to think significant and automatically assume that means big. I don't want you to think significant and automatically think this has to be some earth-shattering, history-making type of work that you're going to do as a volunteer. For whatever reason, we've been sold that. Like, to really make a difference in the world around us, it has to be huge, right? It has to be massive. It has to be written about in history books someday. It has to turn into something mega and massive and absolutely beyond what we could comprehend. I know that that's something all of us have been sold. I know that I've been sold that if I'm going to have any type of big impact, significant influence, it's going to have to be big at that type of scale. And maybe you thought the same thing. Maybe you thought the only real way that I'm going to have a significant impact with this life that I have, that this influence that I've been given is to change the world. Or maybe at least you've thought, I need to change Myrtle Beach. Like, that's my job. Then I'll do something big. Or maybe you felt the pressure that you have to leave a generational legacy. And again, I know this may seem so odd or strange, but I don't know about you. The way that I was raised and the culture that I was brought up in, that was really the only option. It was either do one of those things or bust. And maybe you felt that kind of pressure. Maybe that type of pressure has even compelled you to be sitting here as a volunteer here today. Here's what I want to do. I don't want to take that hope and that aspiration from you, but my hope is that it would become simpler as we have this conversation. Sure, look, all of those things that I just mentioned, they're really big. I think they're things that you could or maybe even should aim for with your life purpose and what it means to be a volunteer and all of that. But what if some of the biggest difference we'll ever make is not actually all that big? What if some of the most significant work of our lives will be accomplished by doing something small? That's what this idea of lead small is all about. See, there's a big challenge in front of us as volunteers in a youth ministry space. The challenge is this: the percentage of kids who grew up in church only to walk away from their faith when they go to college is absolutely staggering. And there's that word church, but think about ground zero. Think about any type of organization or institution or structured anything that a teenager engages with. We know that the amount of them who will disconnect from that entirely, not just the church, not just the organization, but from their faith, is staggering. In fact, depending on the organization you look to who's done research on this, Fuller Theological Institute says that it's about 50% who will walk away. Lifeway says it's about 60. Barna Group takes it even further. It says 70% of the students who engage with a ministry, with leaders like you, in groups like yours, will someday totally and completely walk away from all of it. And I don't know about you, that can be deflating, that can feel overwhelming, or it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge for you and for me to do something to turn the tide. It can be a challenge to put in the work and focus our efforts and our volunteer hours toward changing those statistics for the next generation, for these next generations that are coming and getting older year after year. That's an incredibly big challenge, though. How in the world do we begin to solve? How in the world do you begin to solve this? You have your own jobs, your own lives, your own families, your own free time that you're doing things with. You have your own responsibilities. How can connecting to a ministry like Ground Zero and being involved in the lives of students in this area of the country begin to turn the tide on changing or working towards solving this challenge? Well, as I mentioned, maybe the solution is a lot smaller than we might think. Here's what I want to propose to you. If every kid or teenager had a place to belong and someone to believe in them, it could radically affect their faith and their future. Stop and think about that for a second. It's one of them calling right now. They're like, yes, that's 100% true. Please do that. But stop and think about this. Listen, I know it is not all that profound, at least on the surface, but if you stop and you consider the impact of a place to belong and a person who believes in them, it could change everything. In fact, there's a really good chance that you're sitting here today because that's what happened for you. There was a place where you could belong. There was a person who believed in you to the point where it impacted your faith and future in a way that you're now sitting here and going, you know what? I want to serve. Or you didn't have that. You feel the absence of it somewhere along the line. God grabbed your attention and you began to follow Jesus and things began to change in your life, and then you started to recognize, you know what, I need to be something for the next generation that I never had myself, but what if this is really key to the solution of solving that challenge we just mentioned? And look, here's the reality. That is important, but we can't do that for every kid or student. We can't. You can't do that for every kid or student, as much as we would want to. Come on. You're sitting here and you're choosing to do this with it's Wednesday, right? Yes, your Wednesday evening, because you want this for teenagers. You want this for the students who are walking around in Myrtle Beach right now just looking for something to do or trouble to get into. You want this so badly, but the reality is you can't do this for every kid or student, no matter how bad you want to try. But here's the good news. We can do that for a few. You can do that for your few. Depending on what your role looks like, depending on what exactly it means to you, and hopefully there'll be a lot of clarity around what it means to you to be a volunteer here at Ground Zero. See, when you choose to lead small, what you do is you do for a few what you wish you could do for many. That's the choice that you're making by being a volunteer here. It's not necessarily to go and reach all of Myrtle Beach, and that may happen, but it's the outflow of people like you who are being strategic and specific enough and going, you know what, there are a few students each and every single week that I can influence. And then as things grow and more people come on board and see the good work you're doing, another few are reached and impacted and influenced in positive ways. That's how this thing works. That's how the church has worked for the last 2,000 years. It is about people, ordinary, everyday people just like me and you, who choose to do for a few what we wish we could do for many. And over time, it is amazing at just how far that can go. See, what you do for a few will always have more potential than what you do for many. I told you earlier, one of the things that I get to do is travel around and step into environments like this, whether it's with adult volunteers or staff or getting to speak at students. I was just at a student camp in Seattle last week, and I love getting to do that. This is my second year back there, so I have like a little relational equity or this or that. I am there for a week. You know who's there week in and week out after I'm long gone? The people who are doing what you do. And I recognize that. I know the importance of having my few. I've had my few over the course of my ministry and my life. I've had the groups and the students who I individually am able to mentor and disciple and step into their lives in that way. And I understand that those roots, like there's something powerful about them. And I would always tell our small group leaders, what you do is the most important thing in this ministry. In fact, I would want somebody to walk into our spaces in the youth ministry and not even be able to identify me as the leader. And the reason being is I wanted them to look to you all, the volunteers, and see you as the ones who are really and truly doing that work of the ministry and investing in a few, because that is how you begin to change those statistics that we talked about earlier. So, if that's the case, if this is what's at stake, if that's the challenge that we face, and also the possible solution that's in front of us, what does that mean for you? In fact, here's my question. What is your role in all of this? Well, your role is to be a next generation leader. And I'm going to break that down here over the next few minutes. We're going to get really specific and somewhat granular from a 30,000-foot level, if that's possible, as to what it means for you to be a next generation leader. But let's just stop and think about this for a second. Let me define what your role is in everything that we're talking about tonight. Your role as a next generation leader, sorry, I messed my slides up, is this. A next generation leader is someone who invests strategically in the lives of a few over time so that you can help them build an authentic faith. There's some key pieces there that are highlighted. You're investing strategically, not by happenstance, not by chance, not randomly, strategically. So that's an important part of your volunteer role. No matter what that role is here at Ground Zero, there's strategy behind it. We'll talk a little bit more about what that can look like. And I know over the course of the next year, you're going to hear that from the staff here of how this entire thing, regardless of your role, from the very front door all the way to a conversation that's happening at a table like this, all of it is a part of a strategic plan to help students form a faith of their own, and you play a pivotal role. So your role is to invest strategically and to do that over time, which we'll talk about what that looks like, so that you can help students build an authentic faith. The reason why I say authentic faith is because what students are talked into, they can be talked out of in college, in adulthood, whenever else. In fact, can we just be honest? I think for many of our generations, that has been the case. I think part of the reason why those statistics are so high is because somebody talked us into something. We knew all the right answers. We won all those sword drills. Anybody remember those? Goodness sake. It's a Bible thing. Some of you are like, what? Get it? But anyways, we'd have to rush to find the Bible passage, and we could win those things. But then we got a little bit older. We came across somebody a little bit smarter, maybe even wiser. We were easily able to be talked out of something that, if we were honest, wasn't all that authentic, wasn't all that rooted, wasn't all that wrestled with. But it doesn't have to be the case for the next generation. You, in the role that you're serving, if you take it strategically and you consider the importance of doing it over time, can truly help the next generation build an authentic faith, a faith where they experience the work of God in their lives, a faith where they're able to ask really difficult questions, a faith where they can express their doubts and still feel safe, that type of faith that will weather and stand no matter what comes their way. That's our responsibility. That is your role as a next generation leader. Now, what does this look like? Because there are a whole bunch of different ways that you can do that here at Ground Zero. And I really want to start here. I told you that every single role here is strategic. So iGroup leaders, here's my hope. If you're an iGroup leader, considering being an iGroup leader, I know I mentioned this already when it comes to some of the expectations for an iGroup leader, but everything we're going to talk about is something that it can become your toolkit for what it means to be a great iGroup leader. The rest of this time together, every part of this conversation, my hope, and I would actually say this to my volunteers, is that if you're an iGroup leader, you embody all of these things. They are not optional. This is what it means to be a great iGroup leader. But if you're not an iGroup leader or a facilitator, because a lot of it applies as a facilitator as well, as you're having these conversations and you're creating a safe place, and we'll talk about all these different types of things. But if you're in first impressions, what you are doing is you're setting the tone for a student to be able to step into a place and feel safe, safe enough to be honest, to be authentic, to be open, to then eventually build an authentic faith of their own. You play a pivotal part of this strategy. So as we're walking through these principles, if you're in first impressions, I want you to think about, how am I clearing the way for these things to happen? How am I removing distractions? How am I creating the type of first impression that will take a student who's walking in like this with their guard up and their wall up in front of them from this, to where maybe they're a little bit more open to begin to explore this idea of faith. If you're a host, I think that's something that you do. If you're on that team, as a host team member, everything that we're about to talk about is key, because oftentimes you will be the person who builds the first amount of relational equity with a student who walks in here. So what does it look like for you to embody these principles that we're going to cover? I want you to be thinking through that lens if that's the team that you serve on. If you're in the coffee shop or Top Notch, and that's something that you're a part of, you're going to have these interactions, and you're also going to be setting the tone for groups and for conversations that will be happening the rest of the night. Sometimes all a student needs is a meal. I was going to say caffeine, but we know they don't need that. All they need is a meal. And that meal may be the very thing that causes them for the first time in a long time to feel safe in an environment like this. You play a pivotal role in everything that we're talking about tonight. Security is the same thing. Goodness sake, I don't know how to focus more on creating a safe place, which we'll talk about, than that. I mean, you're literally creating a safe space for everything we're talking about to be able to happen on a week in and week out basis. Production, you set the tone and create the environment for all of these things that we'll talk about. And stage left, you're part of that. That student who's wandering in here wondering, what in the world is all of this about? they may first experience these 5 principles that we're going to talk about with you before anyone else. So during our time, when I use the word group, I want you to be thinking about your group. Whether that's your I group, or maybe you're going to consider your group every single student who enters those doors because you're part of that first impression team. Or maybe your group is every student that you will serve in Top Notch or at the coffee shop. But I want you to contextualize this as we're talking about it as to what it means for your specific area and for you specifically as a volunteer in your specific area. And what's the model for everything we're going to talk about? Well, to lead small, to be this type of leader, we're simply going to embody something that Christians have been called to for 2,000 years. We read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, something so profound but so easy to skip over in Scripture. So we cared for you because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but say this with me, but our lives as well. This is the opportunity. This is the model. You're not just here to talk at students. You're here to live life with students. And that is how this movement, that it became known as Christianity, took root 2,000 years ago. It's how Jesus set this whole thing up to work. And now, in a really unique context, in this city, in this corner of the world and of our country, you get to step in to that very same mission in that very same way. But it won't just happen by proclamation. It involves your dedication to walking through life alongside them, to sharing your life with the next generation. Okay, so let's talk about these principles. I'm going to give you 5 lead small principles that I believe, like I said, will change the game for the way that you lead, whether that's an I group or in any other area here at Ground Zero. These principles, if you put them into play, they will revolutionize not just your space, but I believe this space as a whole. And the reason I believe that is because I've experienced that. I've experienced it in ministries that I've led and small groups that I've been a part of and in all sorts of different roles. When we centered everything that we did around these 5 principles, things began to change and we began to see students building an authentic faith of their own in a brand new way. You're going to see some diagrams here, and that's what this explanation is first. As you're looking at these diagrams, it's really simple. The orange dot is you, the leader, the volunteer, regardless of your role. The circle is your small group or your few. Again, when I say group, I want you to think about whatever that means to you. It may be the students that you're greeting, the first-time guests that you're welcoming, or it may be your I group or the group that you're facilitating conversation for. The small dot in there is a member of your group. That's where it gets really personal. That's where you're thinking about the individual students that you get to care for or connect with on a weekly basis. And then a house, which we'll talk about in a really specific way, represents the kid or student's home as well. So, as we dive into these principles first, let me just stop. I want this to be a conversation too. I know I said I'd pause, but let me just stop here. Any questions, any thoughts so far that I can clarify on before we really dive into these principles? Remember, I'll give you some space to talk around your tables as well. No? Okay. Let's move then. We're going to get into this. All right, the first principle that we're going to talk about is represented by this diagram. And the principle is simply this: to be present. To be present. Now, I know there's a lot of conversation around what presence means, and we talk a lot about being present and being where your feet are and all this. All of that is really, really good. But this principle is very, very specific in the context of youth ministry leadership, regardless of what your role is. There's really 3 ways that we choose to be present. The first one is this: to show up predictably. The second is to show up mentally. The third is to show up randomly. There is something incredibly powerful that happens in the lives of people when you are physically present in their lives as someone who cares about them. Again, you know that to be true because you've experienced it firsthand, and it can be true of you as you choose to be present in the lives of students. We have to understand that institutions like the local church or organizations like Ground Zero, they will never be able to replace the power and the impact of a person who's consistently in the life of a student. I hope you heard me. The institution, the movement, the organization will never be able to replace what you are doing week in and week out by being present in the lives of a student. I know your staff team believes this, and I believe this deeply. You cannot do any of this without each and every single one of you. So you show up predictably, because when you do that, you build trust. All I mean by that is being where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. You show up predictably. Predictably in the life of a student here in Myrtle Beach means that when they step into this space, they're expecting you to be there. So you're there where they expect you to be. You show up predictably, consistently. This one is really, really key. You show up consistently because we are constantly talking about how God is consistent and with them in their everyday lives. And by his grace, but also, this is something for us to consider, God allows us to be the representatives of what he is like to the world around him, which means that if we want to model a God who is consistently active and present in the lives of students, we should step into that role as best as we possibly can as well. We should model that type of consistency to them. So this is not to shame you or to say that you're not busy and don't have things going on. Please hear me. But depending on what role you're in, I would say this, if you're an iGroup leader, this is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we will talk about all night long. The first step you have to take is to be present and to show up predictably. I can tell you story after story after story of leaders who had a really hard time doing this. They didn't stay leaders for long in the context in which I led, but so much of that was because their students would show up predictably and look around wondering where the adult who promised to show up consistently in their lives was. And I can't reconcile those things. So this is why I would tell a leader, before they even stepped into a role like an iGroup leader, I would say, hey, if you can't do that, it is okay. There's no shame, there's no guilt, but don't step into that responsibility unless you're ready to show up predictably. I think consistency is one of the most important things that we can model and do as leaders leading the next generation. The second one there is to show up mentally. Here's what this means. This one is, bear with me, okay? Showing up mentally means that you're going to leave your work, you're going to leave your phone, you're going to leave social media at the door when you step into these spaces. Oh, it's hard. It's hard. Trust me, it's hard as a pastor. Come on. I'm like, this is literally what I'm paid to do, right? And I'd walk in there and be like, gosh, but the day we just had, the meetings I just sat through, the amount of responsibility that I just was voluntold to do. I guess not voluntold if I was getting paid for it, but you know what I mean? Like, that can be really difficult sometimes. But goodness sake, when we are stepping into spaces with students, we have to be there mentally. They'll know if we're distracted. They'll know if we're checked out. They'll know if we're not genuinely interested. And if we can't at very least show genuine interest in who they are and in their lives, they'll never give us the opportunity to talk to them about the things that matter most. This is why it's so important that you would show up mentally. And then third, again, remember as we're going through this to kind of check where these things align, because you're going to see this aligned. It's one of the bullet points in here. To show up randomly. This means to meet them where they are. Maybe it's in a group message with your entire group or a group of students who are connected here. Maybe it's showing up at a game, showing up and messaging them on their birthday, whatever you have to. Again, these things are laid out. It's important that you stay within the boundaries that are laid out here. And just to be wise, you are an adult and you got to think through that. But that you would show up randomly in their lives. Now, that doesn't mean like show up randomly and scare them, at their next recital or their next game. Like that is weird. But show up randomly and support. Come as a group of people. Maybe there's a table that you're sitting with right now who's going to go down to the local high school football game on a Friday night and just show up randomly because some of the students who are here are going to be there. It doesn't have to be weird. You don't have to force it. You don't have to paint your face or do anything that wouldn't be normal for you, but to show up in their space, oh, goodness sake, it makes a world of difference. Will they be awkward when you're there? Absolutely. Will they act like they have no idea what to say to you? Of course they will. May they ignore you? Potentially. That's it. Potential. But just being there means so much to a student who wonders if there's anybody out there who sees them and cares about them. By showing up randomly, you get to be the one who shows them that somebody genuinely loves them and does care for them. I can't help but think of a leader that I had. Her name is Jeannie, and she's still doing this. One of the funniest things about Jeannie for me is that when she stepped in the ministry, she thought she was too old. She thought, I can't do this. No, I'm not going to connect. Students aren't going to think I'm cool. They're going to, this is just, there's a significant generational divide, and I'm just not going to be able to bridge it. That was her biggest concern, and I understand. I mean, she was later in life stepping into a volunteer role and being surrounded by, 20, 30-year-olds who had all the energy in the world and were doing their thing. So she came in with all sorts of apprehensions. She didn't know how it was going to go. But you know what wound up happening? Jeannie, who's still doing this, I believe, to this day, back in Arizona, by choosing to be present, probably more than any other leader, going above and beyond, wound up and forming some of the deepest roots in the lives of the girls that she was leading. She led a group all the way through junior high, which it was junior high in the context that I was in, and then she started with another group and led them through, and she became this just staple model leader. And were there things that she did that I'm sure the girls kind of laughed at? 100%. Did she go like full mom and at times grandma mode on them and give them and bring all sorts of stuff, and they're just like, what in the world is this? Or I'm trying to even think. I don't know if she knit something. She did something one time, like just for her group, and he looked at like, that was Jeannie, 100%. But did those girls know, because of her continued presence, how important they were to her, but then in turn, how important they were to God? 110%. Because Jeannie was so great about being present, creating spaces where she could show up randomly in their lives, hosting sleepovers when it was appropriate, and making sure, to have her co-leader on board and all of this. Like, she went above and beyond with the time that she had to be present in their lives. And I can tell you, those groups of girls loved their leaders, but not only loved their leaders, they had incredibly important and impactful conversations. You know why? Not because Jeannie was necessarily the coolest, not because she was the most relevant, not because she understood all their cultural references. It's because she chose to be present. And what a teenager needs, a teenager in 2024 needs, is an adult who will choose to be present with them day in and day out. So show up predictably, show up mentally, and show up randomly. Here's what I want to do. I want to give you a few minutes around your table to spend some time talking about your answers or responses to these questions. The questions are simply this. Do I have that slide? I think I do. Yep. What are the biggest barriers to being a present leader? And this is what I'm asked. This would be a safe place where you can open and be honest about these things with one another. What are some ways that you practice showing up mentally each week? And then where could we show up randomly in our community? Go ahead and take just a couple minutes and have that conversation. Move to our next topic. I would love maybe just to hear a couple of things that stood out, or something that maybe was brought up at your table that you're like, yes, this would be helpful. This is something I want to share with everybody. What do we got? Did I see a hand? No? Oh, we have a mic. Thank you. Amazing.
One of the things that I think has been, for me, is because I pick some of them up, so I get to be in the car with them and talk with them and everything. But there was one girl that I got close with, and I was able to go to her sister's funeral.
Wow.
And go through all that was going through. And that made such a difference that I think being there. Well, another thing that was interesting was that when I went to the funeral, the family had me sit with them,
Wow.
the family. And I was like, they were like, no, you sit here. I go, what? No, your family.
Wow.
That's what the two of her aunts said. But I think because we're there for them, but picking them up, listening to them, and finding out all the stress that's going on in the house.
Yeah.
Because that was that sister overdosed.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was a very hard situation for the family.
Wow.
But
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for showing up.
But yeah, you got to show up.
Yeah. That's for sure. It's huge. What a great example. Any ideas that came up where you could show up randomly in your community? I think that'd be helpful for the table. I know that was question 3. You might not have got to it, but any thoughts there? Where could you show up randomly here in this community for students? Sporting events. That's great. Baptisms. Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. Both of those are really good. Any others? Did I hear something over here? No? Maybe? Yeah?
For me at church one day when I sang on their
Oh,
worship
yeah.
team.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
And
so
so
cool.
I want to thank her for that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, like, singing on the worship team. I mean, it could be anything. Anything where there's a student that you know is stepping into something that is important and matters to them, it can be really powerful to show up in that place. That's amazing. Those are great ideas. I'm glad that you all shared those and have had those experiences as well. Let's keep moving to our next principle, which is represented by this next diagram that I'll show you. You'll see that the wall is a little thicker there. It has a little bit more infrastructure, and that's because this principle is creating a safe place. Your group, whether it is this group as a whole, the group that walks in to this room every single week, or your I group, this group, your group, should be the safest place in the world for a teenager to talk about anything. This is fundamental. It should be the safest place in the world for them to talk about anything. And the way that you do this is through confidentiality and through accepting them, making them feel safe, making them feel known. We'll talk a little bit more about exactly what this looks like, but how do you do this? How do you create this type of safe place? How do you have healthy confidentiality? How do you have healthy acceptance when they're in these unique phases of middle school and high school? Well, you're going to do this by clarifying their faith as they grow. Part of that acceptance is understanding that who they are today is not who they will be even a year from now. The difference between a 7th grader and a 6th grader, yes, I did the same thing. A 7th grader and an 8th grader is vast. And so to accept them today is also to choose that when they become somebody different, their junior year, when they're a totally different person who thinks different ways and has had time to make all sorts of different decisions, you're going to continue to accept them for who they are as a person created in the image of God. It makes all the difference. And as you do this, as they grow, you're going to help them clarify their faith in ways that are unique to where they are in the unique phase that they're in. How do you do this? Well, first you choose to lead the group. And then you respect the process. We'll talk about each of these here in a second. And third, you're going to guard the heart. So that first one, lead the group. This is what that means. It means that you're going to manage tensions that pop up in your group, and you're going to leverage them to show love and acceptance of everyone. Some of you, I don't really need to even explain what this looks like because you lead that group who's had all that drama. They fight one another, or they can't stand one another, or you have those two in the group that just totally don't get along. Your job, if that is your group, or a group that you know, or just a group of students that you've connected with here at Ground Zero, your job is not to take sides, is not to become another student. Your job is to lead the group. To be the leader. I can't tell you the amount of times where this gets out of hand, where the adult steps in to the drama or the situation or the tension and behaves like another student. And every time that happens, it always goes wrong. It can destroy a group, but it will definitely destroy your influence. So your role, regardless of what your role is on a team here at Ground Zero, is when you see tensions, when you see relational dynamics, is to be the adult, to set the standard. I'm getting ahead of myself, but when this happens in between y'all, your job is to be the adult and to set the example to the next generation. I think about this so often. This is one of the things, it's difficult. It's difficult to watch right now. We know this. I mean, y'all are aware. Both the nation and our church, the Big C church is what I mean, is more divided than it's ever been before. And I can't help but think the next generation is looking up at us as adults and going, hey, you're spending a lot of time fighting. Is that the example that you want us to follow? Or do you want us to be the kind of people that you are constantly teaching us that we should be? As a leader, the way that you contextualize that and make it personal, which again, I told you I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to talk about it here in a second, is to do this, to lead your group, to take that responsibility that really only you can, and to leverage tension. Tension can be a beautiful thing. It was one of the hardest things. I wasn't planning on telling you all this, but I will. One of the hardest things was when leaders would come to me like, hey, this came up in our group, or these two aren't getting along, or I don't know, this guy started dating, that guy's ex-girlfriend, or whatever, whatever the tension was. Oftentimes I'd see leaders want to just like press the eject button. Just get me out of this. Will you just solve it? Like Shane or somebody on the staff team, will you just come in and tell them what to think or what to do? And 9 times out of 10, unless it was really severe, I'd say no. No. Not only is that your role, but it is going to go better for you if you lead through that. If you step into the awkward conversations, if you sit them both down and help them navigate the conflict. It is not fun, and depending on your personality style, it is not something you ever want to do. But when you're choosing to lead the next generation of teenagers, it's just part of our responsibility. And the more that you're willing to do this, the more influence you will gain with the generation of students who are looking for leadership from people like you. So, 1, we choose to lead the group. That's how we create a safe place. It's going to be a safe place for students to talk about anything. They have to know they have a leader who's willing to tread into even difficult conversations, difficult tensions, and work through them for the good of everyone. The second part is to respect the process. Here's what I mean by that. Faith it's a process. We're being formed. We're being formed into Christ's likeness. We're being formed to become more like Jesus. Like that is the process of sanctification is the big churchy word that we use to describe it. So it is a key part of the experience of being a follower of Jesus, and it's happening in the lives of students as well. Even that student that when I said that, you thought, absolutely not for them. It's not. They're going backwards. They're going from 8th to 7th grade in their faith, okay? That's what's happening. I know some of us are probably thinking of that student. Formation is taking place, but it is a process, and it's not one that we're supposed to rush. So what do we do? What is our responsibility? Well, let me say this. Our responsibility is not to change any student. Our responsibility is to love every student. I want you to repeat this after me. Okay, you ready? I am not God. I am not the Holy Spirit. I cannot change anyone, but I can love a few. Here's what I'm saying. The role and the responsibility of the Spirit of God, who I believe is at work in the world around us and in every single student that you will come in contact with, it is God's role to change and shape and form who a person is. We create the space, we create the environment. At times we plant the seeds, at times we are a vessel of that work, but it is not your sole responsibility. What did Jesus call us to? Love. Time and time and time. In fact, it created some tension because the most religious among him wanted to force and change and impose their way on people who were in process. And what did Jesus say in those moments? He told parables, he told stories, even at not even the risk, I think he did it on purpose, of upsetting many of the religious of the day. He did it to show that the way we choose as followers of Jesus to live is by love. And when we do that, what are we doing? We are stepping out in faith, trusting that the Holy Spirit will do the work that only the Holy Spirit can do. Am I asking you to throw your conviction? No. Am I saying that you don't have difficult conversations? Absolutely not. Am I saying that you have to agree with every single thing a student thinks or believes? Of course not. But I am saying Jesus didn't put a qualification on love. So much so, oftentimes he was telling people to love people that they just could not even wrap their minds around loving. That's the same invitation that we have today. And I think the more we do that, what we'll see is those walls come down. What we'll see is that we create a safe space where students begin asking questions, begin wrestling with the things going on in the world around them, begin wondering, is there something different to this whole way of Jesus thing that people talk about? And in those moments, when you've set the tone of love and you've created a safe space for them, then you don't even just get to tell them, you get to show them by your example and by your life. It's a process. Let's not rush it. Let's respect it. I don't think God is freaking out. Neither should we. And we can trust that he's at work. So we respect the process. And then third, you guard the heart. There will be conversations, somewhat in the vein of what we were just talking about, that you will not feel prepared to handle. And that is okay. I've been doing this for a while now. It happens, okay? I feel like every time I'm at a camp or something like that, a student will come up to me and ask me something about quantum mechanics. I can't even say it. Quantum, whatever. Just whatever was in Interstellar or Oppenheimer. These deep, students will ask you these incredibly deep, profound, theological, ideological questions, and they'll do it when you're walking through the hallway or you're making them a coffee, and you're like, what? I just said, do you want caramel in it? Is that, how did we get here? That's just the way students are. That's the way their brains work. It is absolutely fascinating. There will be difficult conversations and questions that come up, and you're like, I don't know, what should I say? What should I not? You may go, I'm not even sure what I believe on that, or nobody ever taught me theologically how to respond to these types of questions. Here, I want to take some of the pressure off of you for those moments. Your job is not to have all the answers. When a student throws something your way and you're like, I have no idea what to do with that, your job is to guard their heart. And to guard their heart in that moment may simply be choosing, no matter what the conversation or topic is, to freak out on the inside, but stay calm on the outside, okay? Because the moment they see you melt down, or the moment you react, they might be looking for it. Are they going to push me away? Are they going to reject me? Are they going to think I'm weird? Are they going to push me out when I ask this question or raise this doubt or wonder out loud about this specific thing? So your job as a leader is to guard their heart by going, you know what? I'm choosing to love who you are more than anything else in this moment, which means that, like I said, you freak out on the inside, you stay calm on the outside, and don't answer a question if you don't have an answer. Again, I'm just going to be real with you. This is something over the last probably handful of years I've just had to deal with on my own. I once thought, especially as a pastor, I have to have answers to these questions. I've got to be able to give this nuance. I've went to Bible college. I study regularly. I'm a voracious reader. I love all of that, and I feel like I have to have answers to things. I have become a lot more comfortable asking questions than giving answers over the last handful of years. And that's because I think the more that I grow and learn, the more that I recognize and realize that I am on a journey to grow myself, and I want to step into or have the privilege of stepping into a journey alongside someone else, not by always giving them. Now, there are certain things you can give clear-cut answers to, but not by faking it. And I think that's the difference. We don't have to fake it. There's been enough fake news. There's been enough headlines. There's been enough controversy over the last handful of years. I think the next generation is looking and going, just don't fake it. Don't make it up. Don't give me something that I can go home and Google and can completely debunk your argument with, in 15 seconds. They're not wanting that. So if you're sitting there and they ask you a question, they throw something your way, and you're just like, I don't really, it's okay. You know what? Maybe the best thing you can do for them is to say, I don't know, but let's find out. And then go on the journey alongside them to discover the end. And you have an incredible team of staff. You have incredible resources. They're training you. It's amazing. Just so y'all know, that training and the website and the stuff that y'all walked through earlier, that is not normal, in all the best ways. I can probably count on a hand or two how many youth ministries and ministries like this I know across the country that are equipping their volunteers that way. So you all have the best of the best who are equipping you. Maybe the best thing you can do in those moments to guard the heart of a student is to go, I don't know, but let's find out together, and then model for them what that journey looks like. Ooh, couldn't that make a difference? Wouldn't that have made a difference for so many of us who were handed a bunch of answers and then years later discovered like, oh, wait, maybe we need to be more nuanced and thoughtful as we discovered some things for ourselves. I say this all the time. We talk about this at Orange. I want to hand and help the next generation build a faith that they won't have to deconstruct in 20 years. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to happen because we're imperfect. My exegesis is imperfect. My interpretation of Scripture and my theological purview is not exactly perfect, and I know that. But the hope is that we would do the due diligence of not just giving cheap answers, of not just giving Sunday school answers as they've been called generationally, but of being the type of people who guard the hearts of students, staying calm on the inside, or freaking out on the inside. You can freak out on the inside. Freaking out on the inside, staying calm on the outside, and being willing to go, I don't know, but I'm not going to fake it, so let's go on the journey to discover this together. Why don't you spend a few minutes around your table answering these questions when it comes to this principle of creating a safe place. First one is this: what do students in Myrtle Beach need to feel safe? Think about your context and community. Second one, what do you wish an adult would have said, done for you that you can do for someone you lead? And then the third one, what are Ground Zero's reporting procedures? Let me walk through this really quick. This is important. I'm so sorry. Part of guarding the heart is, yes, it is the philosophical conversation that we're having, but it's also very practically and importantly doing the thing that you need to do, both legally, but also the protocol of this organization. We talk about this as the 3 hurts. A student who is a threat to hurting others, is being hurt by someone else, or is a threat or is hurting themselves. So others is a threat to others, is a threat to themselves, or is being hurt by someone else. You always have to report those things. I'm not 100% sure what the mandated reporting laws are here in this area, but I know in every context that I've led, you, by choosing to be a volunteer and stepping into those conversations, you are mandated to report those things, meaning you are legally responsible and liable for bringing those things forward. So if anything like that ever comes up, the absolute best thing you can do to guard the heart of a student is to step out and to say something to the staff here, to go to your direct report here at Ground Zero and let them know exactly what is going on. Now, to some students, it's going to feel like you're not guarding their heart by doing this. It's going to feel like you're breaking trust. I promise you, there has never been a situation where saying something was not the best thing for the student. I've been through all sorts of situations, and I know many of you have with students. There has never been a situation where I look back and I'm like, gosh, I wish we didn't report that. It is always better for the student. Sometimes the best thing you can do is, even at the risk of your relationship, guarding their heart by making sure that they are physically safe. So when any 3-hurt situation, hurting themselves, hurting others, or being hurt by someone else, when any of those situations come up, make sure you follow the protocol, you have a conversation with staff. Let me just ask y'all, is there somebody specific that they need to talk to in a situation like that?
I would say it would be myself or Scott or Carly. And we also, like we go over in orientation, volunteer orientation, we have forms for that. So they're located in our volunteer green room. So after you talk to a staff member, we can help you follow that, so that way we can report everything as they've been told, and that we can report it as it needs to be done.
Perfect.
To the authorities, whoever we need to talk to.
Yeah. That's so good. Thank you. That's really, really important. Always, always take that step. When in doubt, do it. Say something, say something, say something. When in doubt, say something. All right, now go ahead and answer. Take a few minutes around your table and respond to these questions. They had some great ideas. I'll just say that. They were talking about the importance, I want to kind of summarize, so correct me if this is wrong, but the importance of meeting some of the physical needs even before, diving into the spiritual, whether it's recognizing a student may need a meal or, a greeting at the door, or just those types of things that cause a student to feel like we're safe and like somebody older than me cares about me, and how that makes a world of difference. Anything y'all would add to that? I think that's really important. Like that, it's amazing how far something like that can go. Let's move on to our next principle. I want to make sure we stay good on time, and then we'll save some time at the end for a little bit of Q&A. So this next principle is represented by this diagram. You're going to see something added there, which is the house. The house is added there. That's because this one is to partner with parents. Here's why this is so important. You as a volunteer, just in this space, you have at most, I'm going to say, this is rare. This is probably not going to happen for anybody in here. At most 40 hours a year with the students that you're serving. And that is if a student shows up every single week, which we know does not happen. A parent, even a parent that you disagree with, or you may not feel like is that great of a parent, has somewhere close to 3,000 hours with their student every single year. So, to the best of our ability, which I know this is complicated in this context, Scott and I were talking about this a little bit, but to the best of your ability, this is why we need to partner with the greatest influencers in the lives of teenagers. And no matter what we think, it's their parents. So part of being a great next generation leader is finding ways to partner with parents in the unique role that you serve in. And the reason why this is important is because when you partner with parents, you're nurturing an everyday faith. You're helping them build a faith that goes beyond the walls of Ground Zero and beyond the programming that takes place in this space. The way that you do this is you cue the parent, you honor the parent, and you reinforce the family. Again, on this iGroup Leader expectation sheet, you're going to see some stuff about parents listed here. This is where that aligns with this greater principle. I'm going to make this as simple as possible. Regardless of your role, maybe you are first impressions, and maybe by chance a parent walks in or drops somebody off, and you see them, even if it's through a window driving down the street. The number one thing you can do is just simply introduce yourself if you get a chance to do that. Introduce yourself even if they'll never, ever respond. I can't tell you, as a youth pastor, how often that would happen. Or how often our leaders would be like, hey, what do we, like, how does this, they never respond to anything I send, any text messages or emails, or I don't even know if they exist. I'm trying to show them that I exist, but all we're asking is not to solve the world's communication problems, is not to solve the problem of a parent leaning in and wanting to give you their attention, but to do your part in that equation and simply to make sure, to the best of your ability, you do something like introduce yourself if you ever get the chance. I just want to say that. I understand your context is complex. Some of the parents who are engaged or not engaged in the ministry, but who have kids who are engaged in the ministry, you may never know, or they may be working odd hours or not often around. And I want to acknowledge that as a real thing. I don't want this to feel like a burden. I want this to seem and be an opportunity that is in front of you as a volunteer at Ground Zero. That when the opportunity comes up, you wouldn't miss it. When the student gets in trouble and you have to call a parent, you would see it as an opportunity not just to discipline, but to connect with the greatest influence in the life of that kid. Whether or not you think it is a positive or negative or indifferent influence, that you would respect the fact that they are the greatest influence in the life of their kids by cueing them simply to who you are, and if you get a chance, to what Ground Zero is all about. And then two, you honor the parent. This is really important. Your job as a volunteer here, no matter what your role is not to be cooler than the parent. Some of you just are, okay? Like, we'll just admit it. Naturally, you're cool, I love you, just own it. You're like, of course. It's not to be cooler than they are or to position yourself as cooler than they are, especially in group. You may want to take the side of a student over their parent when it comes to some dispute or something that happened or them losing their video games for the next 6 months or whatever else it might be. You may be tempted to take the side of the student over their parent. Don't do it. Don't do it. Everybody who's experienced this or knows it's never a win. It may feel like a short-term win, but you will lose long-term influence, whether that is now or 20 years from now, when that student may choose to become a parent, or 10 years or 5 years from now, when that student may choose to become a parent and recognize what they wish somebody would have done for them. So set the example. Make sure you honor the parents. Parents have the most influence. Your job is to help their child connect with them in a deeper way so that what you say here at Ground Zero, what you say about God in your groups, what you say about Jesus when you're connecting with students out in the hallways matters when they get home. And if you undercut a parent, if you prove yourself to be cooler, or you want to take the position of being more important in the life of a student than their parent, that will not happen. Any potential of that taking place someday will be lost. And for what? Our reputation, our own swagger, our own ability to feel like we're cool in the lives of teenagers is not worth it. Even, like I've said, when you don't agree with that parent, they're still the parent. And who knows the opportunity that God may have placed you in the lives of that student for when it comes to their family as a whole. Who knows what that could be? At the very least, we have to keep that in mind by choosing to honor the parent, the guardian, and the home that a student will go home to. The third one is to reinforce the family. Here's what this means. When the parent winds up needing you, show up. Show up and show them that not just their kid matters to you, but that they matter to you as well. I'll never forget when this took place. There was a family in our church, and I say family because both of the daughters were engaged in the youth ministry. The dad, we had no contact with. They had the younger sister had an incredible small group leader. The older one did too. I should clarify that. It's like, one of them was great. But the younger daughter's small group leader was amazing, had sent all the emails, tried to connect, never heard, didn't know anything about this dad. Like, no idea. They were in two different homes, one with mom, one with dad. It was a whole situation that was complex. And then something happened in the life of this girl. Something significant came up, and the dad had no idea what to do or where to turn. Who did he suddenly figure out how to contact? Her leader. Her leader. Who was in the living room walking with this family through crisis? That volunteer. And myself, who got to step in and just hopefully help facilitate and step into a pastoral role in that moment. It never would have happened if after X amount of emails or text messages or whatever else, that leader just gave up on the family. It never would have happened if that leader would have put herself in a position to make herself more important or cooler to the kids than their parents. It never would have happened if she would have stepped in and tried to replace what was going on at home. Instead, she understood her role. She stepped into her role. She chose to partner with parents, even parents that she never honestly was wondering, do they even exist? I'm sure at times she's like, I hear, but I never hear from them. But when that moment came, she was the first person that they looked to. And I bet some of you have that same exact story. I think you shared one of those stories earlier when it came to that funeral. That is the potential of what can take place. Will it happen for every single one of you? No. But we have no idea who that might happen for. Which one of you that may be a story for years down the road. But I can tell you that it will not happen if you choose to ignore partnering with parents and you choose to place yourself as the greatest influence in the life of a student. We have to keep this in perspective, and when we do, those moments may come. I want to give you just a couple minutes to have some conversation around this one at your tables. Take maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to our next one. All right, my friends, I know that was quick, but we're going to dive back in. Two more principles to run through. We're not going to do table discussions for these next two principles. I'm going to try to save a few minutes at the end, maybe even for 5 minutes of just bigger Q&A. But I'm also going to stick around. So I'm going to be here. I'd love, after we're done with this, to meet you, to have some question and response, whatever would be helpful. I'd love to be available. I know the team would as well. But let's move to this next principle. It's going to be represented by this diagram, which is a giant orange circle in the middle. That's because this one is all about making it personal. Making it personal. Making faith personal. Making everything we're talking about here personal in your own life. You make it personal by your faith and your example. You're going to want to write that down. That's important. You make it personal by your faith and your example. What does this look like? Well, you're going to inspire their faith by your example, by 1, living in community yourself, 2, setting priorities, and 3, being real. I'm going to say this on the first one. This group, your I group, is not your community group. Okay? That's really, really important as an adult. It is not your small group. It is not your friend group. It is the group that you are leading. If this is your approach, I promise you it is not healthy. It's not healthy. I'll never forget when this happened with the middle school group. We had a leader who I really believe had all the right intention, but she broke this boundary when it came to making it personal. And what she decided to do was started confiding in her small group of junior high girls about a really difficult divorce that she was walking through. She started processing that with them. And I know I can hear the groans, but I mean, sometimes as adults, like we think, or we have nowhere else to turn. If we don't have community in our lives, we're going to turn to the only outlet that's in front of us. Do not do this. This is so important. As she did that, it became really messy. The girls became really confused. The parents became frustrated. We had to earn back trust. Had to have, obviously, she didn't continue to lead in that capacity, but we had to also walk through, that with, it just becomes really messy. What I would have rather had happen, 1, is that she had community where she was walking through that with, but 2, that she would have just come to me before any of that, and we would have had that conversation. The group is not the place for that. The group that you're leading, is not the place for that. It is so important that you would have your own community, that Ground Zero, and especially the students here, would not be that community. Now, some of you might be that community for one another. Some friendships that you have may be that community, but your group of students is not. Do not burden them with those things. Not because they don't matter, not because your burdens are invalid. They matter deeply, but the faith and future of the next generation matters. That's why you signed up to step into the different roles that you're a part of. So make sure to honor that and honor the ministry and everything that is going on and what God is doing here in that way. So live in community on your own and make sure that you have that because you're leading your group here. 2, you set priorities. And the reason you're setting priorities is because when you do that, what you're doing is you're modeling healthy relationships. You're modeling healthy relationships. You do that by making people like your spouse your priority, your kids, your significant other, your coworkers, your friends, other people in your life. You model in your relationship with them what it means to have healthy relationships. Here's what that means. Do not show up here on your wedding anniversary unless maybe your spouse is here and that's the way you want to celebrate. I'm serious. Show your students what matters most. It's okay. If you're going to miss, that's a great reason to miss. And you can tell them, you know what? We were celebrating last week, okay? It was our anniversary. I took that. That's a priority. You know what you show them? Oh, your relationship with your spouse is a priority. Oh, that thing you went to for your kids is a priority. Oh, that friend that you had that graduated college and you showed up for them, friendships are a priority in your life. You're modeling for them by setting your own priorities and keeping those priorities what healthy relationships look like. That is how you make all of this personal. And then 3rd, be real. Be real. Students, especially students today, can smell fake from a mile away. Don't fake it. What I would always tell our volunteers, any volunteer who would sit down interested in any role, whether it was like a first impressions role or a group leader role, I would say be the fullest version of who you are. That's all I'm asking. Be the fullest version of who you are. They'll smell phony. They'll smell fake. Don't try to be cool. Don't try to use Gen Z or Gen Alpha slang. Like, it's going to be weird unless you're doing it as like a joke, which then they might laugh at even if they roll their eyes at first. You know, that whole thing. Just be real, the fullest version of yourself. Do you know what is cooler than being cool? Not ice cold. Not ice cold. I know some of y'all. Calm down, okay? I know I'm from Atlanta, but take it easy with the outcast. No. It's being real. It really is. What's cooler than being cool is being real. So make sure to make it personal in that way. Let's move on to the last principle, that is moving them out. Moving them out. It's represented by you and those who you're connected with, the students that you're impacting and influencing outside of the circle, because we got to think about what it means to begin with the end in mind, to lead with the end in mind. The effectiveness of what happens inside your circle, inside your sphere of influence, inside of that group of students who you impact and connect with here at Ground Zero on a weekly basis, the effectiveness of what happens inside your circle is measured by what happens outside of your circle. It's important that you think about moving your students out into the rest of their lives. Here's what we know. Oh, let me say this first. When you move them out, what you're doing is you're engaging their faith in a bigger story. You're showing them that faith goes beyond the walls of this building. It goes outside of the programs that they're a part of here. Faith is an everyday thing that impacts every part of their life, their school, their family, their friendships, their community, this community as a whole. So you engage their faith in a bigger story by moving them to someone else, moving them to be the church, and then moving them to what's next. What does that look like? Well, we know by research that it takes 4 to 5 caring adults in the life of a child to give them a better chance of building an authentic faith. Which means that if you're an I-group in here, I-group leader in here, your role is significant, but if you're a security team member in here, you may be that adult that builds some type of connection or relationship that helps them build an authentic faith. If you're first impression in here, you may be one of those adults that they see every week, you get to know a little bit, who's actually one of those 4 or 5 who's helping them build an authentic faith. A parent, a coach, it could be somebody completely disconnected from this. It takes a team to help a student build a faith of their own. So you want to move them to someone outside. You want to understand the team structure of this, that you are not the end-all, be-all, and it's important that they have multiple influences in their lives. You want to move them to someone else, but you also want to move them to do something outside of your circle. The reality is that a student will never feel significant unless you give them something significant to do. So, yes, they should show up. Yes, they should sit in your group. Yes, they should have conversations with you. Yes, they should enjoy a meal up there with some of you. But what would it look like for you to activate their faith, to engage their passion, to find ways that they can serve in this community outside of the walls of this building, to inspire them to get involved, to join an initiative, to do some good work, to care for some people who are often overlooked or outcasted. Move them to do something with their faith if we really want this idea of what it means to be a follower of Jesus to stick outside of the nights where you gather in this space. What if you made the idea of faith not just a ground zero thing, but an everyday thing? By pointing them to serve, but also by engaging them in Scripture, by opening those magazines the team has created for you all and going through Devos together, staying connected through text messages on a daily basis and reminding them that faith is something they experience every day. And then finally, you move them to what's next. Part of your role as a great next generation leader is to help them move through transitions of life. You mentioned this again a little bit earlier. Maybe it's into their next grade. Maybe it's into their new school. Maybe it's just into their next phase of life, adulthood, if they're graduating out or whatever else. No matter what your role is on this team, you can identify what that is in the students that you're meeting. You can see the 8th grader who you know is going to be full of challenges next year, and you build that connection, even if it's for 10 seconds every week, and you begin to ask those questions. You begin to encourage them. As the school year is coming to a close, you ask them how that's going or what they're nervous about when it comes to high school. You can help them transition just by simply noticing the fact that their life is transitioning, that is a huge part of adolescence. And as you do that, you're actually moving them and launching them into their next phase of life, reminding them that they're not alone as they go through it. in goodness sake, when we face any type of change, isn't it good to know that we're not alone? That's part of the role and part of the responsibility of moving them out. Look, I know that we've talked about a lot today as we wrap up. I want to remind you of something. You can't be present, create a safe space, partner with parents, make it personal, and move them out for every kid or student out there. You can't do that, but leaders, hear me. You can do it for a few. So will you? Not just this year, but for years to come. As you continue to step into your unique role in the unique space that God has gifted you in the life of each and every single one of these unique students. If you do those things, it is amazing what God will do to help the next generation build an authentic faith of their own. Let me pray for you, and then, like I said, I'm going to hang around. I know some of y'all probably got to run, but just answer questions and stuff. Lord, thank you so much for this incredible group of leaders. I pray that you would bless the year ahead. I pray that as they would embody these principles, Lord, as they would put into practice maybe some of the things that they discussed around their tables with one another, that it would change the way that they lead, that it would change the way that they're impacting and influencing the lives of students here in Myrtle Beach, that you would bless the work of Ground Zero, not just as an organization, but Ground Zero as represented by these individuals, Lord, who are investing in and caring for the faith and the future of the next generation. Help them to live out these things, not just for the merits of being a great leader, not just for the hours of volunteerism, not just because they believe it's a good thing to do. All of that stuff is good and right, but I pray that they would do it because either somebody has done it for them or it's something that they would have needed when they were a teenager. And Lord, as they do, that their faith would be continue to be formed and strengthened, and they would see the fruit of the work that they're doing in helping the next generation form a faith of their own. We love you, and we thank you so much that you allow us to step into these spaces. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.